Hi everyone, welcome to today's session. Thank you for joining, and thank you to Computer World for having us. Today we're going to be talking about infrastructure as a service, and really the question at hand is it time to get out of the hardware game? And I think you'll find as we go through these steps, the answer to that is a resounding yes. But let's see how we get there. So in terms of who am I and what are we going to cover today? My name is Mark Beder. I look after our solution architecture practice here at Ireland across all our global regions. And today, really, we're going to focus around, what's the landscape today. I do want to call out some points, and we'll go through the slides in a bit more detail. But fundamentally, there's a need to understand that not every cloud is created equal, and you'll see what I mean by that as we go through it. And then finally, we'll cover, Ireland's approach to infrastructure as a service, how we're different, and then some next steps you could take in terms of, maybe you want to look into moving to infrastructure as a service, or maybe you're already on one cloud and maybe you want to consider moving to another. So let's get underway. And I said we'll talk about sort of the landscape and the market as a whole. Some headline statistics for you. One thing to point out, this estimation of 266 billion for 2020. To put that in context, the global spend or the global market for cloud in 2019 was around about 230 billion. So, a significant uptick by numbers, another 35 or so billion dollars, but percentage-wise, that's still more than 10% year-on-year growth. So even though cloud is quite well established, it still continues to grow more and more. And of that 230 in 2019, as the bullet point shows, 49 billion of that was on infrastructure as a service. Now that might sound quite low when you consider the total number is 230. It's also worth pointing out that that 49 billion represented 21% of the global cloud spend. The largest portion of that was actually SaaS. So your Salesforce, your Microsoft 365, Workday, those sorts of applications. And believe it or not, that made up about 63.5% of the total spend in 2019. So SaaS is the second place in terms of spend and where that money's going, but it's still quite a way, rather IaaS is second place, but it's still quite a way off what that SaaS spend is. But these are significant numbers, and it shows a significant trend and a continued growth of cloud consumption. And the question really is, why are companies moving to the cloud? So, in essence, there's a couple reasons, but we'll just cover a few points here. Eliminating the data centers is one of the key reasons that organizations want to move to the cloud. A data center is not going to differentiate a business in terms of value. It's not going to increase revenue. It's not going to make a business more efficient or more agile. It really is just a necessity, or it has been a necessity. And it's no longer the case with cloud and infrastructure as a service. And so getting rid of that data center is a significant driver. And another one, much to the point of what we discussed in terms of those initial statistics, moving to software as a service is another significant factor, as we've seen with things like Microsoft 365 and other applications where line of business applications or business productivity can be moved to a software as a service. It reduces that infrastructure requirements. So therefore, the need for as much infrastructure or potentially the data center as a whole is significantly reduced. But really, it comes down to this. These are the pain points that most organizations, A, feel, and B, can relate to. So as companies continue to grow, there's a need for more infrastructure. There's a need for more storage, for more compute. And with that comes large maintenance. There's more people needed to drive and operate those things. And even with efficiencies around DevOps and DevSecOps and different ways and automation and different ways of managing these environments, they only help address the challenge of increasing scale, but you still need people to run them in the first place. So the teams might be multidisciplinary, but they're still teams maintaining these systems. You still would need someone to go replace a faulty drive, or rack a new server. And then there's the various maintenance, OS upgrades, patches, etc. along the way. And then, of course, hardware becomes end of life. So it's another point in terms of overhead and administration. And achieving a higher SLA, and this is something that I think most people can understand and get be quite familiar with, it's inversely proportional in terms of achieving a higher SLA and the spend associated. In other words, to achieve, say, a 95% availability SLA, it becomes disproportionately more expensive to achieve, say, a 99% SLA. It's only an increment of 4%, but the spend is at least fourfold. That's why I say it's inversely proportional. And so therefore, if you want to move up to even higher levels of availability, 99.9, 99.99, etc., it just gets more and more expensive for incremental gains. And this one is evident. Security and compliance are difficult. They are onerous between the audits and the processes and the maintenance of those, and then the updates to regulatory frameworks, et cetera. To stay on top of that requires significant time and effort and investment from any organization that wants to take part in that space. A couple other things to call out, and really this is kind of the heart of what we're getting at here, is infrastructure, data centers, hardware, compute, they don't differentiate one business from the next. What you do with those systems can be a differentiator between the applications you run or how you've implemented them or the processes you adopt to ultimately drive your business forward. But behind that, what operating system you're using, what server systems you're using, what storage systems you're using, your network infrastructure, those things are not business differentiators. And they can detract a significant amount of time and resource away from what is ultimately at the top of that stack on the right, driving business value. So I think it's safe to say that there's a common theme around infrastructure and the move to cloud and why that's happening. It's fairly universal and quite well understood. But to my point at the start around our agenda, not all clouds are created equal. And so when you come to choosing that cloud, there's certain questions that are worth asking, to establish, am I going into the right space? Am I aware of the potential pitfalls? Have I got all my ducks in a row to be successful with that move? So, this is a series of questions that we recommend anyone who's exploring that move to cloud ask themselves, take a good hard look and say, is this going to work for me? So step one is, management. How are you going to manage that infrastructure? Is it leveraging the same tools that you're familiar with today? Is it ultimately going to be a case of I'm going to need to learn a new set of tools? Is my team going to have to be trained on these new capabilities? And how does that fit in with what I potentially will run in parallel? There's a common theme or common thread of hybrid cloud, where some workloads remain on premises, or maybe you have an infrastructure or an investment that hasn't reached end of life. Potentially new infrastructure was acquired 12, 24 months ago, and the business needs to see that through for another 2 to 3 years. But equally, there's a demand for more. So you then have that sort of hybrid model. So how will that sit side by side? How will that work? So management is a big point to consider. Next up in the list is the performance. Now, different applications have different workload requirements. You'll have, compute intensive, high performance compute workloads. You'll have databases which are very intensive on the disk in terms of potential reads and writes. So can these varying workloads be accommodated where in the cloud of choice? What options do you have around those? And will the SLAs that are available for those performance options meet the organizational requirements? So, this is just another line of questioning which is worth considering when you're taking that decision to move towards cloud. Let's keep going because we've got a few more of these to cover. So security, compliance, data protection. Different industries have different requirements. That's evident. A lot of people are aware of that for when it comes to financial services or health, local government, etc. So can the provider of choice help achieve or deliver on those requirements? And something that's worth diving into that little bit deeper is understanding where potentially the data center facility that the provider leverages is what's actually providing those certifications, or if the provider themselves is meeting those requirements. Because there's a subtle difference between the two. One is, when it's just the facility, then there's all the provider processes on top of that, which may not meet those requirements and are worth scrutinizing. But if it's the provider as a whole, then you've got more of an understanding that anything that the provider is doing on top of that facility is ultimately going to adhere to the requirements that you might have. And sometimes, with providers, you might see a web page or something to that effect where compliance is stated, but sometimes you need to talk to someone about it. You need to understand, well, how does requirement XYZ fit into that? Or can you assist with this audit that we've been presented with in these questions? So that's another factor, is someone available to actually talk to rather than me having to trawl through pages and pages of documentation and potentially still not find the answer I need. And then, this is more around the data protection piece, but how will I actually facilitate data protection in that environment? A move to cloud sometimes means that tool sets have to change and tooling has to be implemented in a different way. And backup and DR are classic examples of those, because a lot of the tools that we and technologies we leverage on premises today are either not supported or have to work in a different way when you move into the cloud. And then lastly, on the side of things is, how is the support set up? Again, some cloud providers will charge additionally for support. Some will provide support free of charge, but it's limited. It might be email only, it might be 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. So it's just another area of consideration which needs to be looked into. And another point for a lot of cloud providers is it's entirely self-service. There's no onboarding, it's sign up and away you go. Figure it out for yourself. Here's some documentation. You can pay third parties consultancy fees to help them make you, facilitate that move. But it's not a guided process. And last one in the mix is on the commercial side of things. Safe to say that some cloud providers out there have billing that is so significantly complex that it's almost impossible to unpick. So what is that going to look like? Is it going to be easy to predict what that cost is going to be? A lot of items sometimes can be metered. So is it understood what that final bill would be, what you can expect with that final bill? So, taking all these points into consideration, taking into consideration where the market is and the shifts that are happening, we see organizations are at a crossroads. They're trying to figure out, here I am in production today. I can, reinvest in my primary site. I can move to a cloud platform like Island, or I could move to another cloud provider. So, something we feel that is worthwhile considering, and at Island, we've developed what we call the formula for success, is there's a number of criteria or a number of towers that the cloud provider should offer you. And if you can achieve the majority of these things, or ideally all, that we feel is setting you up for success in your move into cloud. So let's just look at how these differentiate when we look at your traditional on-premises, a general purpose cloud, and then indeed the Island offering. So again, primary site, what do we think is missing when you look at your on-premises type model? So I'm just going to let this build out and we'll talk about a couple of these points because we don't have a lot of time today, but we could talk for a significant amount of time on all of these. But let's just call out a few. When we talk about capable and computer memory and we've put an X against those, what we're saying is ultimately, once you've made your investment and you've bought whatever that footprint needs to be on day one, that is your footprint. You could spend more and upgrade it. You could buy more hosts, but there's no flexibility per se. It's, I bought solution A, I need that to last for my CapEx depreciation cycle. whether that be 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, whatever that time frame is. But I'm not necessarily going to be able to flexibly change that. I can't suddenly need to deploy a new workload 18 months into that purchase, which needs a different CPU architecture or different memory requirements or more than I acquired without spending more CapEx. So that flexibility isn't there. And then if we move on to something like on the security side, a lot of security solutions are add-ons. Yes, you could buy them. Yes, you could deploy them, but they're not necessarily integrated to your IaaS. So it's more overhead, it's more administration, and more often than not, more expertise required to facilitate having these things put in place. Geographic diversity, just under the flexible one, is a given. If you're on premises or in a single site, even if you're dual site, you can't scale geographically. So let's say you wanted to expand into another part of the world. You would need to repeat the whole process of purchase, infrastructure deployment, connectivity, et cetera, in that new region. Conversely, you could not do that and have that new region connect back to where you are. That being said, though, will the services you'll be delivering in that region be satisfactory when you take into consideration that latency? And in a lot of cases, it's not. Nowadays the expectation is rapid response, quick delivery, and that's not always easy to achieve when you're trying to deliver a service into different geographic regions. We'll leave that at there. There's a few other points we could talk through, but let's jump into your general purpose cloud. So again, I'll let that build out and we can see where we feel that there's gaps in your general purpose cloud. So under flexible, co-location options is number one. Your general purpose cloud providers out there do not offer that capability at all. You simply can't. So if there's a need to maybe co-locate an asset that's to the point I made earlier around that it's not that old, recent acquisition, and you need that in your environment, well then what do you do with that? And then you're typically stuck in some sort of hybrid connectivity model, whereas maybe it could be a large storage appliance, it could be, a black box solution which takes up an entire rack in a data center, something to that effect. If that needs to be close to your other workloads, then you immediately have a problem. So co-location is one element. And the other point around flexible in terms of customized VM sizing is your general cloud providers want your workloads to fit into t-shirt sizes or instance sizes. And usually there's about 200 to choose from, but a lot of the times those don't actually meet the requirements that are laid out from the onset. We've seen customers running 4 CPU, 4 gig of RAM. Well, that option is just not available. Or 2 CPU and 64 gig of RAM. Again, that's not options not available. So you're typically then having to choose, well, either I take excess CPU or I take excess memory to try achieve the balance that I have working well on premises today, just so that I can move it into the cloud. And ultimately, therefore, you're paying for resources you don't need. And just to pick out a couple other ones here, we'll look at compatible. The vast majority of people are running VMware for virtualization on premises today. It's the market leader in virtualization and has been for over a decade. When you move into general purpose clouds, VMware is not the hypervisor of choice. There are other hypervisors, some open source, some not. But the point is, the moment you switch hypervisor, you run into the potential issue of compatibility. You're having to do VM conversion, disk conversion, driver conversion. So that's what we mean by compatibility. And then the last point under compatible, just to call out, under network configuration, a lot of these general purpose cloud providers are very explicit as to how you can connect in, and they offer a limited number of services, which are more often than not a significant cost, despite their limitations, which then forces you down a path of how you can connect. Maybe you have an MPLS in place today with multiple sites and everything works well together, and you have a local telco provider delivering that. What if you want to maintain that? And you don't want to have to re-architect your network to facilitate this move to cloud. You should be able to do that. And a lot of the general purpose cloud providers don't enable you or don't allow for that. And where they do allow for that connectivity, it comes at a significant cost. So, what's the island approach? You'll very quickly notice that we have no red X's along here. And the reason for that is because we offer all these options. When it comes to compute, memory, and storage, it is completely capable for all scales of workload that we talked, whether it be HPC, large databases, whatever that may be, the flexibility is in the system. There's no t-shirt sizing or instance sizing. It's a resource consumption model. We do allow co-location. As you'll see in a later slide, we operate from 10 global regions. From a security standpoint, and this will also come out in another slide in terms of just validating this, is security is built into the platform from the ground up. It's not an afterthought, it's just part of what we do. From the connectivity, we have numerous connectivity options and are quite flexible in that regard. We have the built-in capability to replicate from one region to another. We do run on a VMware hypervisor. We leverage and utilize enterprise-grade infrastructure to deploy our cloud. Full flexibility on the network configuration, including being able to bring your own IP space. And then on the supported front, our support is included. Our support is 24/7, and it's just part of the service. And equally, we have an onboarding service for every new customer. So that's a lot to go through. But what I want to do now is just take a moment to quickly jump out of the slides and show you one or two elements from our console, which just underpins that VMware basis and that familiarity, which makes that move to cloud a little bit easier. So let's quickly take a little sidestep from that. And if we come back behind here, let me just quickly log in. So what you can see here in the background, or at least on your screens, is the Iland Secure Cloud Console. This is a platform that's available to manage and control all your infrastructure running in Iland. One thing that's worth noting before we go too far in is that everything you see in the console is available through API. So if you are leveraging some of those more modern tools around automation, Terraform, Puppet, Chef, etc., to manage your environment, those same tools can be leveraged to manage the Iland environment because it is all API in the background. And one of the things I really want to show today is how, to the point of that VMware compatibility, how it's similar and easy to adopt. There isn't a significant burden or overhead in terms of that whole training piece. So if we look here, we're currently in our Manchester region. Any other region you were deployed in, in terms of running infrastructure, you could just drop down to and select. But we'll stick within the UK, more for latency than anything else. And we just want to show you some of those capabilities. So if I pick a virtual machine that's running over here, one of the things that I want to show is how we can get directly to what's called the VM console. Now, this is something that's not actually readily available or available at all in a lot of other cloud providers. So if I click on Actions and go Open VM Console, let's just make this window a little bit smaller so we can see everything else in the background. And there we have it. We're on our VM. We can send a Control-Delete, we can log in, and we can do various forms of administration. This is incredibly valuable, and to anyone who's a virtual machine or system admin at the moment, they'll understand the value of the console. Whether you're leveraging this to deploy a virtual appliance, or a system's come up post-maintenance or patching and it's blue screened, or there's an error, or there's something wrong with the network and you can't connect into it through its normal method, the console is essential. So there's that element, which just shows that VMware background. Equally, you can go onto any machine and you can adjust its CPU, we can adjust its memory, its storage, its networking. All these elements are built into the platform, just as you'd expect from a VMware environment. We can look at performance metrics, real time or up to a year. That in itself is a differentiation because most environments capture performance data up to 3 months. Equally, we have backups integrated into the platform. So backups for all your virtual machines, all your workloads will take place inherently within the environment. There's auto tracking of events. And then we can equally, to the point of your standard VMware experience, create snapshots and manage the environment just as you would on premises. So really important factors in terms of that compatibility to what we're talking about earlier on. So let's quickly dive back to the presentation, because we're short on time, so let's quickly pick up where we were. So I mentioned the compliance. I mentioned, how security is a part of what we do. So in every region we operate, and Eyeland as an organization, we are certified to over 20 certifications and attestations. So compliance and security is a very important element for Eyeland and how we operate. Another thing that you can do within the console and under that security tab, I didn't show it because we were short on time today, but you can actually pull down reports on demand. So instead of having to, potentially email through and wait for a response, there's a self-service capability to pull down those compliance reports to present onto your own auditors. As I've mentioned as well, the platform is supported 24/7. Support's available via chat function within the console, phone, email, and that's just included as standard. It's not an additional charge. Our billing is as simple as possible. We have a very limited number of items we bill for, rather than having individually metered and metriced items, which makes that billing easy to understand, to see, and also therefore to predict. And to the point on what we thought was what we believe rather is the recipe for success, our connectivity is incredibly flexible. So you can bring in your own connectivity, you can connect into the other cloud providers if you wanted to, as part of that sort of future hybrid model, but that flexibility is inherent in the platform. So you might be wondering, well, this sounds great, but where do you even start? How do you even know if you can move to cloud, if your environment's compatible, what resources you need? So Eyeland's developed a tool called Catalyst. If you head to that URL, success.eyeland.com, and then you can either go to the direct path, which is /docs/Catalyst, or just search Catalyst when you get to that page. You will find the download for it. It's a very light executable, doesn't actually install any files. It's just an executable that runs locally. And it will read data from your environment, from your vCenter, to understand what your cloud workload might look like. And it can help not only for infrastructure as a service, but equally DR as a service, backup as a service. There are other services that Eyeland delivers, and that same tool can be used to help understand the sizing requirements for those. So we're almost at the end here. As I mentioned, Eyeland operates from 10 global regions. We have a 100% SLA on our service, and we've been delivering cloud and infrastructure services for the last, we're in the 13th, but the last 12 plus years. But as an organization, we've been around for 25 years. And we've been partnered with Computerworld for a number of years, going back, the partnership's relatively well established. So this was a whistle-stop tour through infrastructure as a service. And as you can see, the market is certainly shifting to that direction. People don't want to own hardware. People don't want to be responsible for data centers. They want to achieve business value. So if you'd like to see more, please head to that link on the page, eyeland.com/EMEA 2020, Computerworld Defined Tomorrow. You'll find some white papers available for download on that page. Equally, you could launch a free trial if you want to check this out for yourself and get hands-on. And should you want to see a more detailed demo, please reach out to your contacts at Computerworld. They will work with us to help schedule that for you, and we can dive into specific questions or concerns or elements you'd like to validate for yourself. With that, we're out of time. Thank you very much for joining today. Enjoy the rest of the event, and take care.